It was November 24th, 1971. A Boeing 727 took off from Portland Airport, destination Seattle. There were 37 passengers on board plus 6 crew members. 8 minutes after takeoff, a flight attendant receives a note from one of the passengers, which says that they had a bomb. The passenger wanted to receive $200,000 in the parachute. That doesn't sound like much, but $200,000 in 1971 is worth over $1.5 million today. After receiving the money, he jumped from the plane. From that moment on, he was never seen again. Stop! How's this possible? After all, to get on an airplane, you need to go through a lot of security checks. That is right for nowadays, but 50 years ago in America, everything was different. In 1971, a man simply called himself Dan Cooper and bought himself a plane ticket for $20, just like that. Then he commits the very first ever hijacking, and since then, the Cooper case remains the only unsolved hijacking in the history of the United States. This is the story of a criminal that has become a cult and continues to excite the minds of people around the world. The story of D.B. Cooper is perhaps the most mysterious in the history of hijackings. This story is about one of the longest investigations of the FBI, which lasted almost 45 years, and the FBI agents failed to either identify the hijacker or find out his fate. Wednesday, November 24th, 1971, Thanksgiving Eve in the USA. A middle-aged man with a black attaché case in his hands approached the flight counter of Northwest Orient Airlines at the Portland Airport. He identified himself as Dan Cooper and bought for $20 a one-way ticket on Flight 305, a 30-minute trip north to Seattle. In the plane, he took a last-row seat, lit a cigarette — yes, you could smoke on planes then — and ordered a bourbon with soda. It was a white male in his mid-40s. He was wearing a black or brown business suit, a white shirt, a thin black tie with a pearl pin tie clip, a black raincoat, and brown shoes. That's stylish. With a crew of 6 and 37 passengers aboard, Flight 305 left Portland on schedule at 2:50 p.m. Shortly after takeoff, Cooper handed a note to flight attendant. She dropped the note unopened into her purse. Why did she do that? This looks strange and even unprofessional. However, 50 years ago, flirting with flight attendants was a thing. She thought Cooper was flirting with her and giving her his phone number, so she dropped the note into her pocket without reading it. But he leaned toward her and said, "Miss, you'd better look at that note. I have a bomb." After she had read the note, Cooper asked the flight attendant to sit next to him. She sat down as Cooper requested, and she quietly asked to see the bomb. After showing her the contents of his briefcase, Cooper closed the lid and told her his demands: $200,000 in unmarked $20 bills, 4 sets of parachutes, and that the plane must be refueled when it lands in Seattle. The flight attendant addressed Cooper's instruction to the pilots in the cockpit. When she returned, Cooper was wearing dark sunglasses. Captain William Scott informed Seattle-Tacoma Airport Air Traffic Control of the situation, and they contacted local police and the FBI. In order to avoid panic, the passengers were told their arrival in Seattle would be delayed because of a minor mechanical difficulty. The president of Northwest Orient Airlines, Donald Tyrup, authorized payment of the ransom and ordered all employees to cooperate with the hijacker and comply with his demands. The flight attendant later testified that Cooper was supposedly very familiar with the area. As the plane flew over Tacoma, Cooper also correctly noted that McCord Air Force Base was only a 20-minute drive from Seattle-Tacoma Airport. He was not appearing nervous. He seemed rather nice, and he was not cruel or nasty. He did not at all resemble the stereotypical images of air pirates of that time. Cooper ordered a second bourbon and water. He even paid for his drinks. FBI agents used several banks in the Seattle area to assemble the ransom. The money was 10,000 unmarked $20 bills. Each bill was photographed on microfilm by the FBI. The parachutes were originally intended to be delivered from McCord Field Air Force Base, but Cooper turned them down, asking for ordinary civilian parachutes with normal operation and rip cards. At 5:24 p.m., the hijacker was informed that his demands had been met. He allowed the pilots to land the plane at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. Flight 305 landed at 5:39 p.m. Cooper gave specific instructions to park the aircraft on a partially lit runway, away from the main terminal, turn off the lights in the cockpit so that the snipers could not see what was happening there. Cooper demanded only one representative of the airline could approach the plane with the parachutes and money. An employee delivered money and parachutes through the rear door of the plane. Cooper then released all the passengers and 2 flight attendants. While refueling, Cooper outlined his flight plan to the remaining crew. Heading southwest towards Mexico City at the lowest possible speed, approximately 185 kilometers an hour, the maximum height is 3,000 meters. Cooper also specified the landing gear must remain deployed. The wing flaps must be lowered 15 degrees, and the cabin must remain unpressurized. Co-pilot William Radachuk explained to Cooper that the aircraft had a range of 1,600 kilometers, which meant that they would still need one more refueling before entering Mexican airspace. Cooper and the crew discussed options and eventually agreed to make a refueling landing at Reno, Nevada. Why did Cooper need 4 parachutes? Did that mean he might have accomplices on board or that he would jump off with some of the hostages? Before that in history, no one had ever tried to parachute from a hijacked passenger plane. Opening the back door of the plane and extending the ladder, Cooper ordered the pilot to take off. The pilot protested on the grounds that it was unsafe to take off with the aft ladder deployed. Cooper said that it was in fact safe, but did not argue, promising that he would remove the ladder as soon as they were in the air. At about 7:30 p.m., the plane took off. During takeoff, Cooper asked the flight attendant to go to the cockpit and close the door. As she left, she noticed that Cooper was tying something around his waist. Simultaneously with the plane, 2 F-106 fighters took off, which flew behind the aircraft so that Cooper could not see them through the windows. A total of 5 military aircraft followed the Boeing 727. At about 8 p.m., a warning light came on in the cockpit, indicating that the aft air ladder had been activated. Through the intercom system of the aircraft, the crew asked Cooper if he needed help, to which Cooper responded with a no. The crew soon noticed a change in air pressure indicating that the aft door was open. At about 8:13 p.m., the tail of the aircraft suddenly leaned up so much that the crew urgently had to level the aircraft. At approximately 8:15, the plane landed at Reno Airport. The tail ramp of the aircraft was deployed all this time. FBI agents, state troopers, sheriff's deputies, and Reno police established a perimeter around the aircraft as it was not yet certain that Cooper was no longer on board. But an armed search quickly confirmed his absence. From that moment on, Cooper was never seen again. In addition to 66 latent fingerprints aboard the airliner, FBI agents recovered Cooper's black clip-on tie clip, 2 of the 4 parachutes, and 8 relay filter cigarette butts. The tie and clip were made public almost 20 years later, while the cigarette butts mysteriously disappeared from the case file and have yet to be found. It also turned out that of the 4 parachutes, Cooper took only 2, and one of the remaining parachutes had been opened and shroud lines cut from the canopy. Based on the testimony of a flight attendant who saw Cooper tying something around his waist after takeoff, the FBI concluded that these were the same shroud lines from the spare parachute, with which Cooper probably tied a bag of money to himself. The pilots of all 5 planes testified that they did not see Cooper jump out of the plane. Subsequently, it turned out that during the period of the estimated time of Cooper's jump, the plane passed through a thunderstorm area, fenced off from any light sources from the ground by a cover of clouds. Due to poor visibility, the jump was not seen by the U.S. Air Force F-106 fighters escorting the aircraft. After conducting an investigative experiment, the FBI concluded that Cooper jumped out exactly at 8:13 p.m. At that very moment, the plane was flying through a downpour over the Louise River in southwestern Washington state. The exact search area for Cooper's landing site was difficult to determine. The most important missing detail was the time Cooper spent in free fall before his parachute deployed, if it did. It was assumed that he landed in the southeast near Lake Mervyn, 48 kilometers north of Portland. FBI agents and sheriff's deputies searched large areas of the heavily wooded terrain on foot and by helicopter. Door-to-door searches of local farmhouses were also carried out. This search was so extensive that in an abandoned building in Clark County, the skeletonized corpse of a teenage girl who had gone missing a few weeks earlier was found. It has since been suggested that the later eruption of Mount St. Helens in 1980 may have destroyed any remaining physical evidence. The serial numbers of all bills were sent to all gambling houses, banks, and other establishments with a large cash flow in the United States, but not a single one of the bills was noticed. At the same time, local police began searching for suspects. One of the first was a certain D.B. Cooper from Oregon, who had previously had minor offenses. The police contacted him to verify his alibi, and at the same time to make sure that his crimes were committed by himself and not by a hijacker who could use his name. Although he was excluded quickly from the list of suspects, but the local reporter James Long, in a hurry to make a report, did not understand the situation and called the hijacker the name D.B. Cooper, which was immediately picked up by other media, which is why Cooper went down in history under this name. Cooper was not found, nor was his briefcase with the bomb, money, and 2 other parachutes. The people with whom Cooper interacted on board the aircraft and on the ground were interrogated to compile an identikit. As of 2009, the FBI claims the drawing is an exact likeness of Cooper because many individuals interviewed at the same time in different locations gave nearly identical descriptions. Otherwise, only a few pieces of evidence related to Cooper were found between 1978 and 2017. In November 1978, a hunter found a poster with instructions for lowering the aft stairs from Boeing 727 aircraft. The find site was about 21 kilometers east of Castle Rock and north of Lake Mervyn. That is just within the main trajectory of Flight 305. On February 10, 1980, 8-year-old Brian Ingram was vacationing with his family on the Columbia River at Tina Bar Beach. While raking the sandy shore to make a fire, Ingram found 3 bags of money. FBI experts later confirmed that the money was part of the same ransom collected for Cooper. 2 packets of $120 bills each and a third packet of 90, all arranged in the same order as when given to Cooper. The remaining 9,710 banknotes have not yet been found. Today, their serial numbers are publicly available on the internet. The Washougal River Valley, as the most likely location for Cooper's landing, was repeatedly searched, both by individuals and by entire groups, but no other evidence was found. Some researchers have suggested that the eruption of Mount St. Helens in 1980 destroyed all remaining physical evidence. Due to the fact that in the process of hijacking the aircraft, no one were injured or killed, just as the aircraft itself did not get any serious damage, then in 1976, the statute of limitations for the crime should have ended. The ensuing discussion eventually led to the November 1976 Portland grand jury indicting Cooper in absentia and ruling that if Cooper was ever found, then, provided he was alive at the time of his arrest, he would be required to stand trial. Based on all the materials in the case, the FBI compiled the following characteristics about Cooper. Cooper was probably left-handed, as the clip on his tie was snapped on the left side. Cooper knew the surroundings of Seattle well, because while on the plane, he recognized the town Tacoma from a height. Cooper may have been a U.S. Air Force veteran, because he knew the location of McCord Field Air Force Base. It also explained where he might have had the skills of a skydiver. Cooper likely planned to lie low after the hijacking by returning to his former life. He was held by Thanksgiving, which is celebrated on Thursdays and is a day off, while the next 3 days are also days off. During this period, Cooper had plenty of time to get out of the woods and return home before Monday. Cooper specifically asked for 4 parachutes to convince the FBI that he could jump off with a hostage. Thus, he secured himself in advance from being given a faulty parachute. Cooper was well aware of the design of aircraft such as Boeing. He specifically chose the 727 because it was perfect for what he had planned. Its design allowed all the aircraft's fuel tanks to be filled through a single fuel port. All 3 exhaust engines were located well above the stern ladder, and this allowed Cooper to safely jump out of the air zone. The plane itself could fly at a relatively low altitude. The aft ladder could be opened during the flight using a switch located in the same place at the tail of the aircraft. By and large, Cooper had some knowledge about aircraft and was more characteristic of military or agency employee than an ordinary citizen. The hijacker may have borrowed the name Dan Cooper from a comic book hero, a pilot in the Royal Canadian Air Force. However, the Dan Cooper comics were never translated into English and were not sold in the United States, on the basis of which it was concluded that Cooper may have lived in Europe for some time. When Cooper named the amount of the ransom, he did not mention dollars, but negotiable American currency. This is not typical for those who were born, raised, or lived all their lives in the United States. Based on the Dan Cooper comics theory, it turned out that these comics were sold at that time in Canada. Since they were written in French, they were sold in Quebec, and since none of the witnesses noticed that Cooper had any pronounced accent, they concluded that Cooper could be from Canada. From a professional point of view, Cooper's jump was very risky. It was November, and the plane flew through a stormy area, because of which there was a corresponding temperature overboard. But Cooper jumped dressed only in a business suit and moccasins, and with an old parachute and a non-working spare. But even assuming that Cooper survived the jump, he would not have been able to survive alone in the mountains at this time of year. He must have had an accomplice on Earth. But even if he had an accomplice, it would be suicidal. It was late evening, the plane was flying over an inhabited area without bright sources of light, because of which Cooper literally jumped into the unknown, having no idea what landscape he is currently flying over. In general, the FBI was more inclined to believe that Cooper did not survive the fall, and during the investigation period tried to look for him among those residents of the state who went missing during that 4-day period, but such people were not found. Although other test pilots have stated that from a professional point of view, Cooper could well have survived the jump. Other inconsistencies noted by the FBI included the fact that Cooper demanded a cash ransom. Cooper demanded unmarked bills, but it is highly unlikely that he did not know that even in this case, the money would still be tracked by individual numbers. A local journalist put forward the version that the bags of money found at Tina Bar Beach were most likely thrown away by Cooper himself when he realized that he could not use them. In the period from 1971 to 2016, the FBI tested more than 1,000 suspects for the role of Cooper. Some declared right during their lifetime that they were Cooper. Others did it on their deathbed, while still others did not make any confessions at all, and their relatives declared identities because of the corresponding suspicions. In no case was any direct evidence found to charge them. Despite a long investigation, the FBI was unable to either identify the hijacker or find out his fate, and in July 2016, the investigation was officially suspended.